Hey guys, Eric here, welcome back. So, motor's back in, turbos are on, everything's back together, and it's coming together really well in the C8. Now, I'm gonna skip a lot of stuff here because the process of getting this back together is the opposite of when it was coming apart. So once everything's in, it's a matter of just kind of reconnecting everything. So we've redone the suspension, got the control arms back in. Any of the lines or anything we disconnected underneath, they all get reconnected. Everything kind of goes back into place. So I'm not gonna film that, that's pretty self-explanatory. It all kind of just goes back in. Everything here is OEM as far as the engine, transmission, all that stuff goes. So it's all gonna go back together. As I said, I've already gotten suspension and things like that in. I also got these really awesome Dymag wheels that the customer purchased. We're just kind of fitting those up, and I'll show you more of those in a minute. At this point, I'm gonna start routing my drain lines for the turbo, the oil feed lines for the turbos, and kind of mock up the air to water setup and stuff like that. So at this point, it's more of kind of fitting things together, making sure everything is gonna fit and work properly. Then I take it all back apart, and then we install it for the final time. So this is a very important part of this build, which is the mock-up part. So I've already gotten the turbos and everything mounted out of the car. Now it's a matter of just kind of reconnecting everything and making sure when this thing fires that it's ready to go. So I'm gonna go ahead and keep moving forward and keep doing that and film as much as I can, and anything that's relevant I'll stop and explain. But other than that, we're gonna get back to it, keep kicking ass on it. I did mention previously that we were test fitting the new wheels that'll be going on this car. These things are amazing. Brixton Forged is the manufacturer of the wheel out in California. We've worked with them on other projects as well, so very high-end wheel. What's special about these is they feature a Dymag barrel. So this barrel is carbon fiber, all right, which is really, really cool. Super lightweight. Very fitting for this vehicle, very fitting for this build. This is an R11R, this is the model of the wheel. Just a beautiful wheel. Very happy about those, and I'll go test fit the front too at some point, but yeah, we're definitely gonna talk more about these wheels when the time comes. So everything is getting mocked up, as I said. Turbos and everything are in place. The rest of the stainless exhaust stuff, I'm just kind of putting that in right now, just make sure I have clearance. Wastegates, everything clear really well compared to the rear bumper. Right now I'm putting the turbo drains in. Pietz Performance includes every single nut and bolt and fitting you're gonna need, including these really awesome drains. These are nice because they don't use a gasket, they actually use an O-ring, which is what we prefer here if we're gonna do any turbocharger setup. The drain's gonna be O-ringed, that way we don't get any RTV or anything into the drain itself, could cause a potential clog or an issue there. So again, this is mock-up phase, but I am putting the drains on. This will be the next drain I put on. I will run the feed lines, but so far so good. Everything's looking great. This thing's gonna be absolutely amazing, and I cannot wait to fire it up, man. We're getting real close. All right, guys, real quick, while I'm building these turbo lines for the turbos, I did quickly want to talk about the oiling requirements for these twin precisions that are on the back of the C8. So these are oil-fed turbos, so oil is coming in from the engine. It's being supplied from the engine, this fitting here in the top. It does cool and lubricate the turbos, and then the oil has to have somewhere to go. Traditionally, a turbo that's mounted higher than the oil pan can have a simple drain out of the bottom back to the oil pan. Because these turbos are mounted, in this case, lower than the engine, or at least level with the oil pan, and the oil is so far down, we have to have somewhere for it to go and collect, and then obviously be pumped back to the engine. So what Peitz provides are the fittings that we're gonna need, these small fabricated reservoirs that are gonna catch the oil as it drains from the turbo. The oil is then going to return to these Scavenge pumps. These are TurboWorks Scavenge pumps, very nice quality pumps that integrate to the brackets that Peitz provides. I will bolt these up. These are just temporarily zipped just for mock-up purposes, but I will securely fasten those. And then we have our return line. So the pumps will take that oil and they will pump the oil back up, and eventually it'll make its way back to the oil fill on the C8 is where this oil returns. I'm going to show you guys that in a second. But I've pretty much finished all the lines here. So I've already finished my feed lines. The feed lines are -4. They tee off from the oil cooler, which Peitz provides a little T adapter, which is nice. And then I'm able to provide fresh, clean engine oil to the turbos themselves. Then they return the oil through the pumps, back up through the chassis, and eventually back to the engine. You also notice I'm using protective heat sleeve on every single line here. That's anywhere near or headed to the engine. These lines here will be fine. They're not exposed to any major radiant heat, so I'm not too worried about those. But any lines that are going to be coming from the turbos or the pumps or anything back through the engine bay will be covered. So that's what these are. So, all right, so that's just a quick overview of that. I'm now going to show you the oil return lines that are mounted in the engine bay and how that works. And then you guys have a better understanding of how the oil feed and return system work on these low mounted turbos. So this is the dash for feed lines. There's an inline check valve. Pietz provides all of that. That ultimately has come from a fitting that is located where the oil cooler is on the driver's side of the engine. And a line comes up, and then we tee it off here. This line goes to turbo on the passenger side. This line will go to the turbo on the driver's side, and that's going to provide the oil feed to the top side of the turbo. Now, once the oil goes through the turbo and exits the turbo, it'll be pumped back up through these return lines on either side. So we have one coming through the chassis here, one coming through the chassis here. There's a nice opening down through here that provides plenty of clearance for this line. It's not tight, it's not bound. It's got heat sleeve on it. Like I said, I'm going to be heat sleeving everything. And then what I did was I kind of routed them nice and clean to this T block here. I'm sorry, this Y block that Pietz provides. This is going to fit under the intake manifold. I've already fit the Lingenfelter intake manifold on here, and it's going to clear just fine. So this is all going to sit here. It all Ys together into one that comes around, and then it returns here into this 180 fitting. And we'll return back to where you typically put your oil and your oil changes. So that's how that works. Oil into the turbos, oil out of the turbos, pumps back up through these lines, and ultimately returns right here to the fill. Easy peasy. All right, guys, so as you know, the engine in the C8 is a new engine. It's built by Late Model Engines out in Houston. It's a 377 cubic inch motor. So before we fire this thing up, which we're getting very close to doing, I gotta make sure I prime the engine. I wanna make sure that the lifters and all the oil galleys and basically all the moving parts in the engine are coated and covered with oil long before this thing ever fires up. I use the similar setup in all my LT and LS builds, so it's no different with the LT2. That's basically an AllStar oil priming can or tank. I put 4 quarts of rake-in oil in this thing. I've got a special adapter that threads into the port on top of the valley. And what I'm basically going to do is put pressurized oil into this engine. Now, not only is it going to lubricate all the parts before I start it up, which is the most important part of this, but it's also going to ensure that and allow me to check that I have oil at the turbos. So it's going to push oil through the feed lines to the turbos themselves. I'm going to make sure that oil is getting to the turbos and draining from the turbos, so I can kind of check that off the list. And then once the reservoirs and the turbo drains are filled, I'll be able to power the pumps and watch them return the oil through my return lines back to that return over there in the oil feed, or the I should say the oil fill tube when I'm done. So just an important part of the build. I'm going to fill more of that as I do it, but just a nice little step that we're going to do here to make sure that everything is nice and happy when we fire it up. And what I'm going to basically be looking for is oil coming out of all the rocker arms and everything like that. All right, guys, so the priming is complete. We do have oil coming out of all the rocker arms, which is good. We had oil coming out of the turbos into the drains. We tested both Scavenge pumps. Both of them return oil through these lines right here back into the return, so those are working perfectly. So we have oil at the turbos, we have oil in the engine, we have oil at the pump, so everything's kind of ready to start. So that's why that's so important. We're able to test so many things, and that's exactly why we prime these engines. Test all the systems, make sure everything's working, so that when I fire this up, it's ready to go. Here we have the Delta control module. Peitz Performance includes this in their turbo kit. This is the brain. This is what's going to make this entire thing go. Lingenfelter timing controller, an Amplink, the actual Delta control module, all the harness and everything. They do a great job of really packaging this up very, very nicely. Comes with a mounting bracket that's going to go in the tunnel where the factory ECU goes. Comes with instructions on what to pin in and what to splice in. And may seem a little overwhelming, but I assure you, once this is installed, and you just follow the bouncing ball, that it's all kind of self-explanatory. And then obviously once this is in, we can get this car running and tuned, and we can go from there. So I'm gonna go ahead and start putting this Delta control module in, and hopefully when this is done and everything's pinned in, we can turn this car over. we are at the point now where I'm going to start installing the carbon fiber intake manifold. We purchased this through Lingenfelter, good friends at Lingenfelter. It's produced by Performance Design, and what's unique about this intake manifold, other than it just being for the C8, is we actually had this plumbed for direct port meth from ProMeth. So we sent this piece out to ProMeth, and they plumbed it for direct port methanol injection, which, you know, for this build, it's going to be the best way to get even distribution of methanol. That way it sprays in each and every runner in the intake, and we get even distribution of the meth on both sides. Hey guys, Eric here. So we've got the Lingenfelter Performance Design intake manifold in the car. When Alex Peitz and I spoke about the installation on this car, he had mentioned, and I kind of knew that we were going to have an issue here where the throttle body, the Lingenfelter 95mm throttle body, the coupler and everything like that was not going to line up with the air-to-water intercooler that Peitz provides. I won't go into too much detail, but basically bottom line was we had to modify the air-to-water intercooler. We had to cut some material off. Lingenfelter provides a 90-degree transition pipe here with their intake manifold. And what we were able to do is kind of cut and trim the air-to-water intercooler. And we got everything to line up really, really well. It's very hard to see, I know. But basically that transition 90, the air-to-water intercooler, everything's nice and coupled now to the throttle body. And what we're going to wind up doing is welding on this transition that Lingenfelter provides to the air-to-water intercooler. So this will be one piece. We'll couple it with this coupler here. We did have to loosen the air-to-water intercooler slightly to get it all to line up, but man, it's perfect. And not easy, not hard, just kind of a pain in the butt, but it's done. And we will be moving on. All right, guys, welcome back. I went ahead and got the intake manifold on the C8 as well as the air-to-water intercooler. As I discussed before, I did have to do some modifications to the air-to-water intercooler for it to line up in line with that Lingenfelter intake. So that was a little tricky, but nothing we couldn't handle. Got that welded up, and tell you what, everything came out really, really nice, man. Check this out. So this is the air-to-water intercooler that'll come with the kit. We went ahead and plumbed in our blow-off valves. Peitz provides this really nice vacuum block here, or vacuum log, if you will. We've basically plumbed this into the intake manifold, and now we have all of our vacuum and boost references for whatever it is that we're going to need to run, whether it be blow-off valves or any kind of sensors or anything like that. We have a good source of engine vacuum and boost. So this is all done. This is back in. Really, really nice fit. Thing's rock solid. It bolts in down here. These factory mounting points in the transmission, which is cool. So that's all in. The intake manifold itself is bolted in. Thing is ready to go. And as I said, we're able to modify the coupler and the elbow that comes with this manifold down here. We welded that onto the air-to-water intercooler, and there you go. It is all in. It's a little hard to see, but perfectly lined up. Super happy with it. Got the 95mm throttle body from Lingenfelter on there as well, and this thing's ready to go. So very, very close to starting this car up. I've got to run a couple more wires and some extenders. I also had to drill and tap an intake air temperature sensor into this runner here after the methanol, so that our IATs are being read and accurate when the methanol is spraying. So that's a really, really big thing. So I did have to drill and tap the manifold for that. That was no big deal. And other than that, I'm gonna keep rolling, keep bolting this stuff together, and I'm gonna have this car running here in no time. Alrighty, so we are now in the interior of the C8. Let me get my light on here. We will be passing quite a few wires from the Delta control module and the other controllers that Peitz has put together for us to get this thing to run through a small access hole that's down here in the tunnel. There's actually a hole right here. It's covered with a little piece of foil from the factory. I popped that out. I've got a piece of wood here, and I'm just holding the carpet back. This is the other side of that hole I showed you on the inside. I just grabbed some split loom real quick, grabbed a bunch of wires that are going to be going inside the car, and threw them into this loom. Nothing fancy, just to get them up and out of the way. They're secured to the coolant lines here, and then they run across the Delta control module. You don't have to do that. The wires are certainly protected under this in this tunnel, but I just wanted to keep them covered. So again, just some simple split loom there, nothing fancy. And what I'm going to do here is open up this hole and throw a grommet there and start feeding these wires through. Got a couple wires here I'm not worried about yet. Intercooler pump and my Meth trigger wires for the solenoids. I'm going to leave those be for now. I don't need those to get this car running and driving necessarily. We'll plumb that and wire that stuff later. We do have a MAF adapter for the Delta control module that's going to give us MAF signal. That's all running and hooked up. Also have an air intake temperature sensor down here, an IAT sensor that's been plumbed into the manifold, which is under or lower than the Meth nozzle in this particular runner, which is the way to do it. That way, when Meth sprays, we have an accurate intake air temperature reading that's actually going into the cylinder. So that's all plumbed in. That's part of the Delta control module as well. So we're going to use multiple inputs or outputs in this case to properly tune this car. So intake air temp being one of them, our MAF signal being one of them. RPM, things like that. So that's all done. Obviously, when I come back, I'm going to rewire and kind of reorganize all this stuff and clean it up. But for now, this just, it's temporarily set up so I can get the car running and driving and proceed. I'm going to run a few more wires under the car, and I am done with that. And then we will move on to getting this car fired up. So part of the electronics portion of this install is to link to the Amplink. The Amplink is what's ultimately going to control our Scavenge pumps, heat exchanger pump, and other things. And I'm able to set it through Bluetooth, which is pretty cool. So I've turned the power on, obviously, to the car, and I've connected to the Amplink that's part of the Delta control module in the tunnel of the car. And now I'm going to go through here and follow Alex's instructions and basically control and program each output, when they turn on, when they turn off, how they turn on, how they turn off, so on and so forth. So that's all done through Bluetooth. So pretty trick application here. It's through Amplink's app in the App Store. So we'll go ahead and do that now and get us one step closer to getting this thing running, driving, and off this lift. All right, guys, welcome back. Eric here, Florida High Performance. Today is a huge day in the build of this twin turbo C8. We've been through a lot. We've showed you a lot. We're finally hitting the rollers today. Now, we're not quite ready for tuning. We're not quite ready for wide open throttle, but we are ready to start breaking this engine. And remember, this is a brand new engine from late model engines. It's an LT2, it's 6.2 liters, but forged pistons, forged rods, stock crank, and ported LT2 cylinder heads. Late model engines procured and did everything as far as the short block is concerned. We got it back. We made it a long block. We assembled the heads and everything and got it in the car. And you saw all of that. This is a new engine. It's very important that we break it in properly. So by getting on the dyno, I'm able to actually drive the car. I'm able to seat the rings, break in the bearings, kind of heat cycle the engine a few times. We'll do a few rounds of break-in oil and new filters, make sure any contaminants or any material left over from the break-in process is removed from the engine and filtered out of the oil. That's a very, very important step to ensure longevity on a build like this. We do that with any of our builds here, any of the new engines, they all get properly broken in. Simultaneously, while we're doing that, we'll be able to work with Alex Peitz, send him data, partial throttle data and idle data, so that he can start adjusting the tune by way of the Delta Control Module. We'll get a little bit more into the actual tuning process in the next episode. Basically, this episode was getting it back together, getting the car running, and getting it on the dyno, as you see here. We're very excited. We're getting very close to wrapping this project up. This is a huge job. For anybody wondering out there, I've done some pretty crazy stuff in the last 20 years as business. This definitely has pushed me as a technician, as a shop owner, but it's been a pretty cool process, and I'm excited that it is on the dyno. And we will get some footage of it driving. I'll get some footage of it in the interior, showing some of the tuning software and how that works, as well as some footage outside of the vehicle on the dyno. So we're gonna get to it. We're gonna start breaking this thing in, and we will go from there. I appreciate you guys checking out episode number 2 on this twin turbo build. I hope you find it educational. I hope you find it exciting. Looking forward to episode number 3. Episode 3 is gonna be final tuning, wide open throttle, all of that stuff, as well as hitting the street in this twin turbo C8 and really seeing what it does with 700 plus horsepower. I'm very excited about that. So stay tuned, guys. Thank you very much for checking in. Remember to subscribe, click the like button, and of course, as always, comment, and I will get back to you in the comments. So I'll see you in the next episode. Until then, enjoy. Thanks, guys.